USF Safety Florida, committed to reducing work-related illnesses and injuries for Florida's small businesses. Information and consultation appointments are available at usfsafetyflorida.com. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler. On today's First Coast Connect, we're talking about the biggest stories of the week. Among our topics, Florida politicos will play a big part in the next Trump administration. An investigation raises questions about the new Duval superintendent's leadership style and temperament. The district's new school board gets off to a rocky start. Book removals more than doubled in the past school year, and we get the latest track of Tropical Storm Sarah. We'll discuss all that and more with our panel of journalists. Later in the program, a local performer whose music has inspired leaders from Nelson Mandela to the Dalai Lama. Join the conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937 or email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also tag us on social. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
I'm from NPR News in Washington. I'm Corva Coleman. There's reaction to President-elect Donald Trump's announcement that he will nominate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be Secretary of Health and Human Services. Kennedy is an environmental advocate, but NPR's Selena Simmons-Duffin says he is also skeptical of vaccines and has spread false information about them.
He has some views that are really far out of the mainstream. Vaccine skepticism. Current CDC Director Mandy Cohen wrote to NPR yesterday, quote, "I don't want to go backwards and see children or adults suffer or lose their lives to remind us that vaccines work, and so I'm concerned," unquote. The idea of someone who's actively sowed misinformation about vaccines being in charge of the government's scientific research and public health agencies really horrifies a lot of people in those fields.
NPR's Selena Simmons-Duffin reporting. The former president also says he'll nominate former Georgia Congressman Doug Collins to lead the Department of Veterans Affairs. He's also going to select North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum as Secretary of the Interior Department. The Republican National Committee is asking Pennsylvania's Supreme Court to stop the counting of certain mail-in ballots from the general election. As NPR's Hanzilo Wong reports, the request comes amid a statewide recount of Pennsylvania's U.S. Senate race.
There's a long-running legal debate over whether to count Pennsylvania mail-in ballots that arrive on time but in envelopes without the current date handwritten by the voter. State law requires the date, but it's an open question whether rejecting ballots for not having one violates Pennsylvania's Constitution. Officials in Bucks County, a Philadelphia suburb, decided to count some 400 of what are often called undated or misdated ballots. The Republican National Committee sued and asked the state's Supreme Court to weigh in. Joining in the lawsuit is David McCormick, the Republican whom the Associated Press has declared the winner of Pennsylvania's U.S. Senate race. 2 years ago, during a primary recount, McCormick took the opposite position in court, arguing that undated and misstated ballots should be counted. Hanzilo Wong, NPR News.
Street drug deaths in the U.S. are dropping at the fastest rate ever seen. A new report by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention shows roughly 16,000 fewer lives lost in a 12-month period. NPR's Brian Mann has more.
Drug deaths driven by fentanyl spiraled upward for years, but that trend suddenly reversed in 2024, and new CDC data show the decline in fatal overdoses is continuing and may even be accelerating. The latest surveys for the 12-month period ending in June show a 14.5% drop from a year earlier. Experts say that kind of improvement is unprecedented. In a statement, Dr. Rahul Gupta, head of the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, pointed to better medical care for people in addiction and the spread of the drug overdose medication naloxone, also known as Narcan. This marks the lowest level of fatal overdoses in nearly 4 years. Brian Mann, NPR News, New York.
You're listening to NPR.
And you're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Good morning. I'm Stephen Ponson. It's 9:04. The city of St. Augustine is hosting its annual community recycling event today. It's an opportunity for residents to offload goods that can't go in the recycle bin, like documents in need of shredding, electronics, and used cooking oil. City residents can bring up to 5 boxes full of everything from laptops to batteries, but TVs and hazardous waste like paint, pesticides, and used tires will not be accepted. The free event starts right now at the city's solid waste facility on Riberia Street and ends at 1 this afternoon. For more information, you can visit the city's website at citysainaug.com. Former Florida State Senator Frank Artiles will be sentenced next week for campaign finance crimes he committed as part of an election conspiracy plot. A jury found the 51-year-old Miami Republican guilty last month of masterminding a so-called ghost candidate scheme in 2020. The idea was to run a third-party candidate who could take votes away from the incumbent Democratic state senator, allowing the Republican candidate to win. And it worked. Artiles will be sentenced Monday morning. He faces up to 15 years in prison. This afternoon in Jacksonville, we'll have sunny skies with highs in the lower 70s and dry conditions today right on through the weekend. Mostly clear with lows in the mid-50s tonight. Both Saturday and Sunday, highs in the mid-70s and sunny skies. Once we start the new work week, we'll have sunny skies on Monday and highs in the upper 70s.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the John Templeton Foundation, funding interdisciplinary research and catalyzing conversations to inspire awe and wonder. Learn more at templeton.org. And the listeners who support this NPR station.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Opinions expressed on the First Coast Connect Week in Review are those of our panelists and do not reflect the views of WJCT News 89.9.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and it's Friday, which means it's time for our First Coast Week in Review. Among our topics, Florida men and one local woman emerge as top Trump appointees. School book removals more than double. A report clears Duval superintendent of racial bias, but finds he routinely mistreated employees. Political infighting begins even before the new school board gets sworn in. And the state may be getting a break from the record-setting hurricane season as Sarah makes a surprise turn. To talk about all that and more, I'm joined by an all-star panel this morning. Anthony Austin, evening anchor at First Coast News. Hi, Anthony.
Good morning, Ann.
Very early morning,
yes,
Anthony.
Yes, it is.
David Bauerlein, Metro reporter at the Florida Times-Union. Hi, David.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Ann Maxwell, investigative reporter at News4Jax. Hi, Ann.
Hi, Ann. Thanks for having me.
And Megan Mallicoat, education reporter at Jacksonville Today. Good morning, Megan.
Good morning, Ann.
So let's start with some big news on the state's political front, with a number of high-profile Floridians getting tapped for seats in the new Trump administration. David Bauerlein, this is something that you've been covering. Give us a lowdown on who's been tapped and who's going where.
So for the Trump administration, in terms of from Florida, Matt Gaetz, who was until very recently a congressman from Northwest Florida, is going to be nominated for Attorney General. And then you have Michael Waltz, who's a congressman from just south of us, who is going to be nominated to be the National Security Advisor.
Kind of southern St. Johns County guy.
Really, really big roles. Of course, Chief of Staff is going to be Susie Wiles, who's very well known in Jacksonville political circles. So you have those three. And then you have, of course, Marco Rubio, the senator from Florida, who has been nominated to be Secretary of State. So, yeah, I mean, there's degrees of sort of acceptance, or not, maybe acceptance is the wrong word, degrees of reaction to those particular picks. I think there seemed to be a lot of shock to Matt Gaetz' Attorney General selection. Nate Monroe is a columnist for us and does a lot of statewide opinion columns now. I think even Nate was shocked by that one, so that tells you something in terms of, because he's really been covering this whole idea of how Florida's influence on the Trump administration and vice versa. So that's probably going to be an interesting pick to see how that goes through Senate confirmation.
Sure. Partially interesting because Matt Gaetz was investigated by the agency that he is being tapped to run. I mean, he was investigated for some allegations of sex trafficking.
Right.
He was not charged, but he was under investigation by his own, Congress, by the ethics committee when he quit, resigned suddenly.
Right. And so because he resigned, that means the report that was supposed to be dropped today was no longer released because he's no longer a sitting member of Congress. So they say they've lost jurisdiction over him. But there are several senators who have said, look, it's part of our advising consent. We need that report so that we know who the person is that we are appointing Attorney General. And it could be added that, yes, Matt Gaetz was investigated by the Justice Department and cleared. So was the president-elect Trump.
Yeah.
So there's this idea he's going to go in and kind of reform or burn the place down, whatever your view might be.
You also reported on kind of adjacency to some of those appointments. You mentioned Susie Wiles, who's well known here. She was chief of staff for a few mayors, managed campaigns for Rick Scott, Ron DeSantis, and then Donald Trump. But her daughter is actually gaining influence in D.C. With kind of an expansion of her responsibilities with a consulting group.
Yeah, without a doubt. So her daughter is Katie Wiles, who worked as a communications chief during Lenny Curry's administration. So it's kind of like a like mother, like daughter thing. Susie Wiles went up through City Hall, was a chief of staff, a director of strategic initiatives under mayors Delaney and then Payton. Really was known as a really consummate communicator in terms of getting the message out for the administration in different ways. And so her daughter also was in that role at City Hall under the Curry administration. Susie Wiles went on to become a lobbyist. And now her daughter, Katie, is, I'm not sure if she's actually a lobbyist, but she is working for a firm that does consulting and lobbying work. And the founder of that is a guy named Carlos Trujillo, which I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He was really wired into the Trump world and was really big on helping them get their Latino vote out, and also a big ally of Marco Rubio. So I've even seen some reporting that he might be have a role in the State Department as well. So yeah, so when Trump does well, wins the election, there's some professional benefits that come along with it, so Katie Wiles will have an expanded role in both a Jacksonville office and a Washington, D.C. office with that firm.
And it's going to be up to Governor Ron DeSantis to replace Senator Marco Rubio. He has not been on the same page with Donald Trump recently. They were allies at one time. But this is, basically a lot of power that's been handed to him by the Trump administration, because this is obviously a very significant position, one that the governor may himself have some interest in. There's also Donald Trump's daughter-in-law, Laura Trump, who's interested possibly in the position. So it's going to be an interesting choice to watch.
Right. Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to see what he decides to do. You would think, how he's moved closer to Trump in the past, he would probably do something in line with what the president-elect would want to see him do. It's not hard to see him, kind of falling in line there. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think there is a sense, Anthony, statewide and nationwide, that people believe that this is an election mandate and that Republicans are going to follow and fall in line with basically what the president is asking for.
Yeah, I believe that is definitely going to happen. It's interesting because we know that Rubio and Matt Gaetz, they will need Senate confirmation. Waltz won't need that. But just kind of going back to the controversy with Matt Gaetz, I've seen Democrats and Republicans who are kind of questioning that, as we just mentioned earlier. In fact, one of the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, when he was asked if the investigation should disqualify Gaetz from leading the Department of Justice as Attorney General, he said, quote, "It's not my decision, it's the president's decision." So kind of just taking a neutral stance, I guess you would kind of say, in a way. Well, maybe not too neutral, but just saying, it's going to be the president's decision and we're going to do whatever he decides.
Yeah. And Megan, these, run the gamut. I mean, I think people look at Rubio as kind of a more traditional choice. Mike Walls is a former Green Beret, so he does have, military experience. But there's one other Florida wild card that you've been watching, which is Tiffany Justice, who is the founder of Moms for Liberty. What are you watching with her?
Yes, that's definitely a wild card because the rumors that are circulating say that he's considering appointing her as Secretary of Education. But at the same time, he's also on record many different times saying that he wants to dismantle the Department of Education. And so I don't know how you'd have a Secretary of Education without a Department of Education, but who knows? It's a whole
Yeah.
new world.
Yeah, and she has expressed interest in the position. I mean, if appointed, if selected, she's kind of said,
He's
yeah,
willing to serve. I think, yeah.
yeah. But I mean, just maybe another example of, um, the disruption that kind of is intentional with some of these agencies on the part of the president-elect, that he basically, wants to dismantle some of these institutions.
Right. And as the co-founder of Moms for Liberty, I think that Tiffany Justice is well known for being a disruptive factor in Florida's school board system, surely. Because as Moms for Liberty has grown, their influence with school boards has grown. She was in South Florida Summer, I want to say Indian River, school board member there, and it's interesting to see that her influence kind of grow and spread, and think about what that might look like nationwide.
Yeah. Well, if you're just joining us, I'm talking to Anthony Austin and Maxwell, Megan Mallicoat, and David Bauerlein about the week's big headlines, and we want to hear from you. Join the conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email comments or questions to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also tag us on social or even watch our program live stream right now on Facebook and the WJCT YouTube page. I want to move on now to a report, Megan and Ann, that you've both been covering this week about the Duval County Superintendent, Christopher Bernier. It's a report that was just issued but began a while ago. So, Megan, where did this investigation begin, and what did the report find?
Well, the investigation began in April. We covered it in May and June in the midst of Dr. Bernier's interviews for superintendent here. He started out in Lee County, or he came from Lee County, and right before he applied to be superintendent here in Duval, he was the subject of a whistleblower complaint that said he was bullying this employee that filed the complaint. There was an allegation of racial discrimination as well. And so Lee County opened up an investigation on that from an independent firm. And at the time, we were tracking it because we had a tip about the whistleblower complaint. The school board here said that they knew about the complaint, that they had done due diligence, is their common quote, to investigate, what was going on, and they were satisfied with Dr. Bernier as a candidate. And of course, they then did hire him.
And we didn't know at that time, when you were doing that reporting, the specifics of the investigation, just that they were familiar with the outlines of it and they were comfortable with they were still comfortable with him as a candidate.
Right. So at the time, I had, as I was reporting the story, I talked with a lot of people, many of whom are actually in this report, and the story that we were hearing at the time does line up with the results from the report. And so when the report came out this week, it cleared him of the racial discrimination allegations, but it doesn't paint a very nice picture of what he's like to work for in his office.
Right. So, Anne, he was accused of initially bullying, racial discrimination, making derogatory comments about women. As Megan says, some of those were not substantiated, but he doesn't come across as a very nice boss. I mean, the report found that he was sort of universally unpleasant to his employees.
So, right, they interviewed 22 people, I believe, including 18 current employees at the school district and 2 former employees. And there were only 3 who kind of, 3 employees who disputed, what was being said about the bullying allegations. So in the end, I'll read a quote from the report. The evidence substantiates that Dr. Bernier often spoke to his chief operating officer, that's who the complaint was about, using profanity and in ways witnesses described as dehumanizing, insulting, loud, and disrespectful, impeding his ability to perform his duties and making it difficult for him to meet his expectations through the creation of unreasonable deadlines. Kind of the sense you get from reading the report is that, he treated some other employees similarly and had a temper and maybe left people walking on eggshells as a result.
One of the allegations that was substantiated was that the report found that he appeared to regard some female employees less favorably than men.
It did clear him of making derogatory comments about women, and from what I recall, it said, the evidence indicates he may have a bias towards women, but it didn't really commit one way or the other. They couldn't find enough, using the B word, things like that. The report didn't substantiate those allegations.
So we should say we've invited the superintendent on this program. I know both of you have made efforts to contact him. What are we hearing from him directly in the wake of this report?
Um, so far, his spokespeople are saying that he's off to a great start in Duval, that he's committed to, he recognizes the report shows some areas for improvement, and he's committed to improving his interactions with personnel. And they're, like I said, saying that he's off to a great start in Duval.
Anne, are you hearing anything different?
No, same thing. We just got that statement from the DCPS spokesperson, and they also noted that Dr. Bernier was forthright with the board about the investigation. And like Megan said, board members looked into this and were aware of it. And so it seems like, this might cause waves and chatter, but as far as policy goes or, anything operationally substantial at DCPS, this isn't going to make much of a difference, at least from what we're seeing so far.
Anthony Austin, one thing that stood out to me in this story was that the superintendent didn't cooperate with the investigation, that there had been a request that he, talk to the person who was doing the report. He initially offered to provide some written answers, but then his attorney just stopped responding. And so during all the weeks that this was happening, he didn't offer any explanation or response to address the claims against him.
Right, and I think that is concerning, especially for the team here in Duval County Public Schools who might be under him when it comes to his leadership. When you hear about that reports that was happening, that he wasn't responding. But the school board, they have basically said that they were aware of these allegations and that he was forthright with them, that he did mention about the situation in Lee County. But I can see the concerns that are there because of this.
Yeah. David Bauerlein, I'm curious, there were allegations in the report that people suffered health impacts, that they felt that they were actually having, they cited things like depression, high blood pressure, having to take time off work because of the stressful environment. And I mean, just knowing how the system works, it sort of calls to question, is there a legal risk, for somebody who's leading a school district like this? Is it something that the Duval County School Board and the district in general is going to want to watch for, so that they're not, engaging in any kind of situation that might attach to liability of some kind?
Well, I would think they would. Yeah, you would think they would want to have some sort of process in place to keep that communication open from, obviously the superintendent is in charge of hiring his or her staff, but if you have this history, then that really would behoove the board for a lot of reasons to understand what's going on over there in that office. You think about a superintendent, usually a superintendent of a school is someone who has come up through the ranks as a school teacher and maybe has this sort of demeanor or personality that kind of reacts well. I mean, what could be more pressure filled than teaching, 30 teenagers in a class they maybe don't want to be in? And that's generally the sense you get of superintendents. They kind of have that personality. It sounds like the superintendent is different in terms of his personality, and maybe that's gets results, and it's sort of a hard charging type of persona. But if it's a toxic workplace and people are feeling those kind of impacts, then you don't want that to be replicated here in Duval County. That is for sure.
Yeah, I want to take a call from Linda in Mandarin. Good morning, Linda. Go ahead.
Good morning. I don't know if you guys are aware, but I was wondering, do we know what the terms of his contract, since the school board said they were aware of these charges, I'm hoping they have a clawback provision in his contract that if we get notice of this ongoing behavior here, that they will be able to terminate him without a big massive payout to get rid of him. I hope you guys have some information. If not, let's start looking into that, because if they knew about this behavior from the whistleblower, I'm hoping we have somebody tight on the negotiation end to put a clawback in his contract. Thanks.
Thanks, Linda. It's a good question. And I don't know the terms of his contract in terms of if, he's fired for cause or, if they are dissatisfied with him at some point.
So I would have to look in his contract specifically. I believe that there is a clause for being fired for cause. There's nothing specifically about these types of allegations or like a plan in that case in his contract. But, he was able to negotiate an exit from Lee County in the midst of these allegations. It was still pretty beneficial to him on his way out. So I think it probably would have to do with how he negotiates a potential exit.
Yeah, and we
wherever
should
he's
say
at.
that the district spokesperson, Tracy Pierce, said, quote, Dr. Bernier acknowledges that the report reflects areas in which he can improve, particularly with interpersonal interactions with senior leaders, and he's committed to that improvement. And so I would guess it's fair to say that, this report, if nothing else, would be a wake-up call, and he's probably kind of working on curbing that behavior. So we have a comment from Linnell on Facebook. She says, I have noticed that one of the newly elected Duval County School Board members is openly anti-LGBTQ and seems vulnerable to government controls the weather disinformation. This is concerning, considering his role in our education system. So let's shift gears if we can. It is another school-related topic, but it kind of has to do with how this new school board is starting to meld as a unit. The new members haven't been sworn in yet, right, Megan? But they'll
be sworn in on Tuesday.
Okay. But they had this workshop.
Yeah, so they had a workshop this week where they gathered the new, the members-elect in to start some process type of discussions. And one of the things that they were discussing was their leadership for the coming year, because the school board amongst itself selects a chair and a vice chair for a one-year term every year in November. And so they were discussing who that was going to be in this case. And so it was the first opportunity that we had to see the new members and that what the new makeup of the board was going to be. And it was pretty interesting.
Yeah. As one of the members said during this, kind of spicy discussion, he said, it's starting out pretty bad. Let's take a listen to some of that meeting.
I am reading the writing on the wall, and this is going to be a continuation of the punishment that I received for not being a good Republican when I voted for Matt. I think I understand where we stand.
So I think I know where we are.
We're just talking about nonpartisanship, and now you're talking about being a good Republican. I mean, I think that's really
You can just
snarky.
give it up, April. You
no,
got
I just
it.
think it's really snarky.
You got your people. You're
oh
done.
my gosh.
We're good.
Cindy.
So obviously tense moments there. And we should say that initial exchange was started by Cindy Pearson. She was basically trying to make a second run at being a vice chair and is in the minority, I think it's safe to say, with this new block of like-minded board members. So, Anne, remind us how the board makeup has changed in this last election.
I was listening to some of that workshop, and I heard Daryl Willey, who's the outgoing chair, say Cindy Pearson and I are the only members of the new board not backed by Moms for Liberty. So they have a solid majority. And there was, a solid Republican presence on the board before, but I think it's safe to say, it's probably moved rightward. So it'll be interesting to see, how they react to these tough changes happening at the school district right now with budget shortfalls, school closures, things like that.
Yeah, and Anthony, the current chair made the case that he believes that there's a need for balance in the leadership. He was supporting Cindy Pearson as the vice chair because he said, the chair seat is basically expected to go to Charlotte Joyce. She's a Moms for Liberty candidate, also endorsed by the governor, as a majority of the school board is now. 5 of 7 were Moms for Liberty endorsements, and 4 of 7 were supported by Governor Ron DeSantis. And so Chair Willey was saying, we believe that we need to represent the other parts of our district.
Right. And I think that's been a concern for a lot of people, because I know when we were kind of covering the elections and the new school board members, there were concern from people in the community about this, about the number of candidates who were backed by Moms for Liberty, because if you don't agree with their stance on situations, we have another portion of our community that don't. And when you're looking at this and you're concerned about your child's education within Duval County Public Schools, and you're seeing this on the board and the reflection of it, you kind of wonder, is my voice going to be heard if I don't agree necessarily with what they have to say? What changes are they going to make to the district and to my child's education?
Yeah, David, the school board is also looking at possibly tackling some particularly dicey issues. It's already come up about whether they should change the policy surrounding their sex education program, whether they should change that from an opt-out education offering or an opt-in. And I've been around long enough to know that the sex education conversation is always hard in this district, and it always seems to be kind of a push-pull about where we need to be to give kids what they need to be safe and healthy, and concerns, particularly with this board, which is driven by a parental involvement mission, that there could be that tension again.
Yeah, I think the answer to that will be whatever the Moms for Liberty position is on that, and that's what the school board will end up approving. I don't know what the Moms for Liberty position is on that, but there's much more of a emphasis on the sort of assumption that you're opting out unless you opt in, because the parents should be able to decide on behalf of their children. So I think there's going to be a lot more of that in terms of a lot of things are people are given the chance to opt out of stuff, or even the assumption is they don't have to do it unless they opt in, kind of thing. If I could just bring up one thing real quick in terms of the Republican versus Democrat, there was a surprise when Reggie Blunt defeated Hank Rogers for that final school board seat that was still open. I was at a Democratic Party rally before the election, and Hank Rogers spoke at that. And the Democrats were very clear that if you're a Democrat, this is the person that we are backing in this race. I went to a Republican get out the vote rally, and Reggie Blunt was name checked there and saying, go support Reggie Blunt. He's the guy for us, and we need to increase our majority on that school board. So even though they don't have Republican or Democrat, that's clearly out there in terms of how they fit into those political ideologies.
Yeah, it's sort of partisan without being partisan. And I want to ask you, Megan, because that came up in that meeting. There was discussions about, hey, the state just voted down a return to partisan school boards, and let's be nonpartisan. But there was a comment made by one of the school board members, Lori Hershey, at the end saying, well, we kind of know the lay of the land based on this election, and our leadership should reflect the realities of this recent election. And so, and obviously that is a rightward and Republican shift.
It is, and that's a political statement in and of itself. But I think that it's interesting to me in this context because school boards are supposed to be nonpartisan. That again, the state voters voted to keep them nonpartisan, and so I actually spoke with Cindy Pearson yesterday, and we were talking about how she said, there's either a 5-2 majority or a 6-1 majority, depending on how you count. Because some people, because Cindy Pearson is a registered Republican, some people automatically lump her together with the Moms for Liberty candidates. And so I asked her, I said, how do you count? Then is it a 5-2 or a 6-1? And she says, well, I'm nonpartisan. I got into this because I'm nonpartisan. I don't want to bring my politics into school board. And so it will be interesting to see how.
But she was the one who said, I think I'm being punished because as a Republican, I wasn't a good Republican when I supported masks.
I mean, she essentially got primaried, right? Yeah, right. Because she had the support of the Moms for Liberty, I believe, if I could be mistaken on that. But last election, 4 years ago, she certainly had the support of her party 4 years ago. But she lost it because she didn't support some of these more extreme positions during COVID. And I think there were some other issues as well. And she lost the support of her party and then got basically primaried by Becky Nathanson, who ran against her. But, in the end, she still won the election. So
we've got a call from Jay in Mandarin. Good morning, Jay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. First, if I'm not wrong, hasn't the application or the request for homeschooling in Duval County increased since all these things happened? Am I wrong about that?
And all these things, you mean sort of post-COVID or?
Well, since the election, the Moms for Liberty, like all these things, these political injections into the education in Duval, hadn't the requests or people want to do more homeschooling, hadn't that increased? Am I wrong about that?
Thanks, Jay. I don't think you're wrong. I mean, certainly there's more incentive now for people to homeschool in terms of the money that can follow a student. But I don't know the latest numbers particularly.
I don't know the latest numbers either, but I know that over the past couple of years, there's also been changes in the voucher programs that provide funding to homeschooling families. So I don't know that
They've expanded.
they've expanded, and also then to private schools they've expanded. And so I don't know that it would be you'd be able to draw a definite line between all these. The ideological makeup of the board has changed, and so people are trying to homeschool versus, well, there's more voucher funding out there for people making a homeschooling choice.
Right. And Maxwell, I mean, obviously that split those changes where people are leaving public schools either to go to charters or homeschooling or private schools with those tax dollars that attach to them now is making life a lot more difficult for the district financially.
Right, because the money follows the student. So when, like we've seen the enrollment in Duval County Public Schools drop, the funding goes with it. And so that makes it difficult to, allocate resources, more difficult. And so that's why, you have these schools that are closing to try to save money. But definitely, I think the voucher program is a huge factor in that.
Yeah. And David, those impacts of school closures, I mean, those are the kind of thing that we don't really know the impact until maybe even years down the line.
Oh, in terms of the education quality yes, without a doubt. I mean, it's not going to be like a before after right away when schools close, but the overall direction of public education is it's kind of being sliced and diced over time. And, the big benefit of the big attribute of a public school system is, there's a commonality where everyone in the community is going together to the same school. That's being lost because it's becoming really balkanized and fractionalized in terms of how people get their education when they're growing up. I grew up in a town where everybody went to school together, and that was a good thing. I always thought because you saw people after school, and worked with them at the fast food restaurant and played sports, and you also had class together with them. But that's becoming less and less the case, I think, now.
It is interesting. I just want to say that because I was just thinking that what you just said, because everyone who I went to kindergarten with, that's who I graduated with. But looking at the school systems now, it's all so divided when it comes to choice and where you can send your child
and almost along political lines in
right,
a lot of ways.
Right.
Yeah. A question that Jay brought up, my producer Stacy just noted that the Washington Post found that from 2017 to 2022, Florida's homeschool population grew nearly 70 times faster than the state's public school enrollment and was among the highest rates in the nation. That's according to the analysis by the Washington Post. So to Jay's point, that does appear to be the case in droves. So I want to move on to another school board topic. But if you're just joining us, we're talking about the week's big headlines with our panel of journalists, and you can join our conversation at 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org or tag us on social media. So one more book or school topic is book removals. And that is something sort of linked closely to the Moms for Liberty movement. But this new report just came out showing that after last year's record number of book removals from school shelves and school library shelves, that number actually more than doubled, Anthony. I think that came as a surprise to a lot of people.
Right. Clay County actually leads the entire state in the number of books removed from classrooms and libraries. That's information coming from the Florida Department of Education. And something I think that's important to mention, in Clay County, they confirmed that 94% of the books removed was because of one community member, and that was Bruce Friedman, who represents the organization No Left Turn in Education. So some of the books removed in Clay County: A Song of Ice and Fire, Slaughterhouse-Five, Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon, and also The Fountainhead as well. But more than the 700 books removed from libraries across the state, 287 came from Clay County. So it's interesting to see these numbers with the book removals.
And I think what's interesting as well about the gentleman that's behind so many of those is that he doesn't have a
He
student
doesn't
in
have a
the
child
public
in the
school
district.
system. Yeah. So and that is something that the governor was forced to shift on after this, greater parental involvement. David allowed parents to complain to have books removed at least pending a review, and so there was this sort of wholesale removal of books as they were being evaluated. Is this appropriate for these age groups? Should we put them back on the shelves? But kind of the immediate response was that they were removed as a default. The state has now said, there's got to be a limit on that, and sort of rolled that back a little bit.
Which is good. I mean, the idea that you go in with the presumption, you're almost like the book is almost guilty until proven innocent. And so, yeah, you deprive students of what are really classic works of literature. I mean, Anthony was mentioning, I mean, there's a lot of other books like that, the sort of the image of these book removal cases is, a graphic depictions of sex, and you wouldn't want your child to read that unless you knew and gave them permission. Okay, but a lot of these books are just in the mainstream of great American novels, and but and ones that would really probably excite students to read and give them a lifelong interest in reading, and they're just title after title like that. I mean, one of my favorite authors is Flannery Connor. There's a book that was removed, "Oh, the Good Man is Hard to Find." It's a collection of stories. I've read that a few years ago. There is nothing in there that someone would say, "Oh my God, that's like prurient sex in there," and there's no sex in there, So I just find the whole thing just a little bit, strange, and it's good that they have made it harder to remove them, and as opposed to it being a default where it's out until somebody decides it's now appropriate to go back in.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because Wicked was removed from bookshelves in St. Johns County. Of course, we know Wicked. There's the new movie coming out. The book inspired the Broadway production, which was very popular. So to hear that was removed, I just kind of wonder what was the issue those who challenged it took with it.
Yeah.
So.
And it's interesting because, I mean, we talk a lot about classics that wind up on that list, or books that we may remember, like David says, for a lot of other reasons other than maybe some, mentions of sex or violence. But Clay County also banned pretty much every Stephen King title that there is, 69 books. And, I think back to when I was in junior high school, and those were the kind of books that really got kids excited about the idea of reading something just for pleasure, that they couldn't put down and they would pass to their friends. And, I know people that probably wouldn't have read otherwise for pleasure were it not for like an exposure to Stephen King.
Yeah, and like I saw the Game of Thrones books were on there. Kind of books kids you think would be really interested in reading, and kind of listening to David talk and seeing some of the books on the list, it seems like there's some at least that are on there for depictions of violence. Like I remember in A Good Man is Hard to Find, there's a shooting. I read some of that in college, I believe. And you think about like maybe violence in Stephen King novels, and that also seems interesting considering, what kids have access to on the internet or video games or movies. I mean, that.
Right. And that could be, maybe that is the case, Ann, and that was the
I'm just
reason
thinking out
given
loud,
at least for it. But, okay, well, every play of Shakespeare falls in that category, and, the Bible. So,
That's true.
The Odyssey, Iliad, where do you draw the line then? And you basically, it's been overreach, I think.
Right, because I'm pretty sure we all had to read Romeo and Juliet in high school, and we know how that ended.
Yeah.
So
Not well.
Not well, yeah.
Megan, this was the report that came from the schools, but the National Free Speech Group PEN America actually had much, much bigger numbers. And so, when the school report itself said that there's, a doubling, more than 700 books removed from libraries across the state, PEN America found that it was 4,500 in Florida. And maybe some of those are duplicate titles from county to county, but still way more than any other state in the country.
Yeah, my understanding is they used a more broad standard to say what was coming out. So I don't know exactly how they define that, but I do know that, for instance, and I think this is true of all districts, but in St. Johns County specifically, if a librarian a school librarian had a book that was damaged, like say a child took it home and left it out in the rain and she needed to replace the book, she still had to go through the same approval process to um, take it to the committee and then take it, to the same very strict
to get it
approval process
approved
to get
again.
a copy of the same book that she was just replacing because it was damaged. And so, I don't know if maybe some of those 4,500 books were simply because there was other reasons why books were removed. I'm not sure. That's an interesting number. It's a lot different than
Yeah.
the state number.
Speaking of St. John's, we have a call from Jessica in St. John's County. Good morning, Jessica. Go ahead.
Good morning. Thanks for taking my call. I'm calling in regards to the earlier conversation your panel was having about school choice, and I just had a comment that I wanted to add to the discussion. My husband and I bought a house purposely so that we could put our kids in the local public school and have them kind of grow up in a neighborhood where they were going to school with their peers. But they also, both of our sons happen to have special needs, and they're pretty intense. And at the moment, we're actually having to drive one about 30 minutes away, one way to go to school, and the other take him in the opposite direction, another 15 minutes. And we are actually discussing having to move out of state because the lack of supports for special needs in the local school that is our community school, which we would very much love to take our child to. And we've been having to research, actually uprooting our family and moving to a different place just because of the complete lack of supports in the local schools for the unique special needs that our boys have. And so that I very much feel the tension of those two dynamics, and I wanted to share that.
And Jessica, are your children attending school still in St. Johns County? It's just that the local school will not accommodate them?
Yes. So one is going to a charter school that has some unique accommodations that are working for him at the moment. And then the other is in an intensive ESE classroom that's only available in, specific schools so we have to kind of drive him to that as well. But I know, in some of the states and school districts that we're looking at in other places, they have a lot more supports that would enable our children to potentially be in the local community where we're, living and raising them. So.
Well, thanks, Jessica. I mean, I think it would surprise some people that she's having the problem she's having in that particular county, Megan, which is considered the very best in the state.
It is considered the very best, although there is a lot of talk just among residents that it struggles to accommodate situations like this. It's great for kids that don't have 504 plans or have special needs, but I have heard many different parents say similar things about its ability to reach students with needs outside of the typical box.
Mm-hmm. And just to add to that, because I've heard that same complaint, I've also spoken to a few teachers about that issue, and just with the growth of the district, I've heard from some teachers they don't have the resources to support those students with special needs. They would like to, but they just don't have, trying to handle so many students at one time, they just don't have what they need.
I'm sure it's difficult, and the schools are already
Right.
bursting at the seams
Right.
over there. So.
We have a call from Daryl in St. Augustine. Good morning, Daryl. Go ahead.
Yeah, good morning. Well, dumb people make dumb decisions for our elections, so keep our kids dumb and we can control everything we need to control.
Thanks, Daryl. I mean, there are people that are concerned about, the choices impacting the quality of education. We have a message from Ed on Facebook. He said, moved from a particular grade level to a different grade level doesn't mean that the book is banned. There's a difference in maturity and comprehension level between a 7-year-old and a 17-year-old student. That's a very good point. I mean, a lot of these removals, as we're calling them, have been basically a recategorization of, is this appropriate for this age group? It might be appropriate for an older child, Megan, but as he points out, 7-year-olds have different standards and expectations.
That's true. A lot of the books on this list were, shuffled to different age groups. A lot of them were also removed from the entire K-12 system. But the state is being careful to use the phrase remove, I think, and they've come out to say, no books have been banned, but I'm not sure about the semantic difference there between removing a book from access for all students versus banning it.
Yeah. And just very briefly, I do want to sort of touch on the hurricane season, the ongoing Anthony hurricane season. We got, I guess, some good news for us, not necessarily
Yes.
great for our Central American neighbors with Tropical Depression
Right.
Sarah.
Yeah, it's going to be definitely rougher for them with Sarah right now. I think all that we're expecting Tuesday into Wednesday, just mainly rain for our area. But I know that the meteorologists, they were looking at different models last week that were kind of showing it possibly coming here or to southern Florida.
All right. Well, David Bauerlein, Anthony Austin, and Maxwell, Megan Mallicoat, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Ann.
Thank
you.
Up next, we're going to be talking to a musician whose music has inspired everyone from Nelson Mandela to the Dalai Lama.
Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. Accidents can happen when you least expect it. For decades, our attorneys have dug out the facts to help juries decide who's at fault.
More at terrellhoganlaw.com.
How nurse practitioners help break down barriers to care in rural areas. I'm Dr. Joe Servin. Join me tomorrow at 4 for What's Health Got to Do With It, only on WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville.
On the next Fresh Air, our interview with Kerry Russell. She stars in The Diplomat, which is in its second season. And we remember Dorothy Allison, who died last week, and listen to her interview about her novel Bastard Out of Carolina, based on her experience of being physically and sexually abused by her stepfather. Join us.
Today at 1 on WJCT News 89.9.
On the next Florida Roundup, for decades, snowbirds have flocked to Florida for the winter, but could the recent bout of destructive hurricanes change that? What does the threat of severe weather, rising homeowners insurance, and other costs of crippling storms mean for people who sought refuge in the Sunshine State's warm winters? If you're a snowbird, or you've enjoyed the business that snowbirds bring, share your comments and questions. Email radio@thefloridaroundup.org, then join me, Matthew Petty, Friday from noon to 1.
As many expected, Donald Trump's party wins total control of Congress. Less expected,
it must be the worst nomination for a cabinet position in American history.
The president-elect's nominees stun many, including his own advisors. And new polling suggests Republicans are feeling positive about the economy for the first time in years. More on the Roundup next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, she's a singer-songwriter whose music is as much a call to action as it is a celebration of humanity. Listeners of this program will have heard of Morley's music and heard it on this program before. It's the centerpiece of this weekend's TEDx Jacksonville show, and she's here to give us a preview. Good morning, Morley.
Good morning. Good to see you again.
Nice to see you as well. So you perform tomorrow with your keyboardist. Is your husband, Chris Bruce, also joining you?
He is flying in from London to join us for the show after. He's flying in from London to join us for the show afterwards.
And tell us a little bit about where he's been, because had been on a touring adventure himself.
Yes, he's the producer, co-producer with Michelle and Deggiocello of her last bunch of albums. And the last one was the Omnichord Real Book, and that won the Grammy. And this one also just got nominated. It's called James Baldwin, No More Water, the Gospel of James Baldwin. And it's an amazing album, and they're touring all over the world with it. And I just love it so much. You should. It's all over. You can hear it on every platform. No More Water, the Gospel of James Baldwin. It's Michelle and Deggiocello, and Chris. And Chris is one of the producers and songwriters on that.
Excellent. So he's going to come in and do kind of a tight turn for the TEDx performance.
He's not going to join us for the performance at TED, but he's going to come and join us for the performance at night at
Babs Lab.
At Babs Lab.
Okay, that's cool. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So tell us, people who maybe haven't heard your music, it's kind of this blend of soul and folk and jazz. It's really a unique acoustic sound. How do you, find your inspiration for the music that you create?
I really feel I've been thinking about it a lot lately. What inspiration is. To be inspired is to be part of an ecosystem. Is to remember we're part of each other. We are of the earth. We're not on earth. When I go into water, I'm not going into water. I'm of water, in the water, and that's part of what I'm going to be talking about at the TEDx talk. But this ecosystem of our interbelonging is sort of the best place for inspiration. That is a place for ideas. That is a place for possibility, and we feel it when we're listening to music. When we're listening to a song, and like when your song comes on, something you really love, all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, that's my jam, and then all of a sudden the shoulders are moving, the hips are swaying, and there's this automatic place inside the body that's relaxed and familiar and acquainted with a moment in time. No matter where it was, where you may be, the first time you heard that song, whatever that good feeling, you're all of a sudden you're in that place. And that to me is evidence of our being part of this ecosystem of our interbelonging. And so that's where I get my inspiration, our togetherness. And I think that these cycles of violence and these cycles of separation with each other come from us forgetting that we're part of an ecosystem, that we're actually of this earth, we're of each other. And so when we other each other, when we make each other so far, like all these divisions, it's out of rhythm, it's out of melody, it's out of harmony. We're out, but we're inside the rhythm and inside the harmony with each other. Is because we're remembering our natural place, and that is to be in chorus together in harmony.
Your music has reached so many people and on so many different platforms. Like, it's been used in TV commercials, it's been used in documentaries, it's inspired people, as I said, like the Dalai Lama and Nelson Mandela. What is it that you think your appeal is on that level in so many different ways?
Maybe my love for all those people you just mentioned. Maybe my shared love of us as a human family, and not centering ourselves as human beings on the planet. Like, we are the center of our narrative. Like, when we get freaked out about something not going right for us, for me, I realize it's because I'm centering myself as a human on the earth. What if we center the water? What if we center the trees? What if we center the soil and where we get all of our nourishment? Like, we have to change the way we're centering ourselves in our even our personal thinking, in our relationships. There's something so the people you just mentioned are people that inspire me to think beyond myself.
Just briefly, you're going to be performing, as you said, 2 shows. One is going to be at UNF on Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
That's the TEDx Jacksonville show. And then Saturday night at from 8 o'clock to 9:30 at Babs Lab. And tickets are on sale at the door.
Yes.
And you are going to play us out. I just want to say thanks for our listeners for listening. If you have feedback or suggestions, you can send either to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. Remind you to listen to What's Health Got to Do with It this weekend at 4, when Dr. Joe Servin explores a new technology helping the paralyzed reclaim their independence. And on Monday, we're going to be getting some expert advice about how to navigate the holidays with relatives on the other side of the political divide. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Yeah, well, that's a great segue, because that's amazing work you're doing here.
All right, Morley's going to take it away.
Come catch your breath with me. Feel too much, feel nothing. Come catch your breath with me. Let's find some healing balm inside this grief. So much banking on our exhaustion. So much turning on our turning away. So much gliding on our division. But so much riding on our love power today. Come catch your breath with me. May all held captive captive on Mother Earth be set free.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Visit Gainesville, Alachua County offers inspiring fall escapes with seasonal arts and music festivals and scenic outdoor adventures where wild horses and bison roam. Road trip inspiration can be found at visitgainesville.com.